Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. In our last How To session, we will learn about how innovation opens new opportunities for environmentally sustainable trade. I am now pleased to ask Mr. Mafip Chunga, Senior Manager of KPMG Zambia, to moderate the last substantive session. Please.
Thank you very much. As you said, my name is Mafip Chunga, and we are live on Facebook. We would like you to join the conversation on hashtag WEDF17. Let me begin with thanks to two groups of people that have brought us here today. The first group being the ITC, led by the Executive Director, Arantxa Gonzalez, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade of Hungary, led by Peter Soato. Thank you very much. Budapest has proved to be not just a beautiful city, but a source of fantastic, innovative entrepreneurs, as you'll see in a moment. So, our session, welcome to Waste to Wealth, the penultimate session of the 2017 WEDF. The concept itself is a simple one. You take a material that one group doesn't want and you monetize it in some way, you convert it. It's waste to wealth. But as President Ada said yesterday, we're still consuming 1.5 times what this earth can give us in terms of raw materials. All over the world, we are extracting materials, we are hunting for materials. You've got mines, factories, chemical industries constantly sucking our earth dry. The question I have today is, why don't we have more waste to wealth conversion? And the people beside me hopefully will be able to answer that one. I have an illustrious panel here beside me, and I'll start introducing them from left to right. On my left, we have Octavio Quintana, who's from Valopes, Chile. He's actually from Bogota, Colombia. He'll explain that one in a moment. He's an industrial engineer who's trying to set up a digital ecosystem to track and provide information about waste materials so that it makes it more viable to purchase. Beside him, I have Israel Miganes, who runs a company called HM Mexico, who are recycling tires, and his company is specialized in what many have been calling today the circular economy, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Beside him, we have Mr. Pál Kush from Budapest, Hungary. Thank you. And his company, Thermowatt, recycles energy. And he'll explain how that works in just a moment. And on the very far side, I have Ann Chapas from the International Trade Center, who's a trade specialist focused on TPOs. And we'll get back to that in just a moment. But I'll start with you here, Octavio. Your company, Valopes, documents and gathers information about waste. Tell me a little about that.
Basically, hi everyone, I'm Octavio Torres. First of all, thanks for this invitation. It's a pleasure to be here talking about waste to wealth, which is actually a topic that it's quite trend. So at Valopes, what we're trying to do is first to improve the quality and consistency of the data, of the waste data. Nowadays, as you know, there is a huge amount of waste being generated worldwide, and most of it ends at landfills. So what we're focusing is with the industry players to digitalize their waste in order to start getting data of where, when, and how it's being generated. This is through our cloud-based platform. And from that point ahead, we provide them the capacity to get traceability of the waste, so they can know what happens with the waste once it goes out from their operation. And in the midterm, all this effort is in order to acknowledge where is the waste available and start connecting it with players as Israel, who is capable of transforming, as well as Pál, some waste or residual resources into new material or products that enters back to the economy. So basically we're trying to help close the circle by improving the quality of the data, of the waste data.
Okay, I'll ask two questions here. The first of those is that you appear to be doing what all other industrial engineers are doing, which is to map an industrial process and identify where waste is being generated. Mm-hmm. And then you're trying to store information about it. How is that different from what an in-house engineer is doing?
Sure. Well, usually industrial engineers, we focus on the process, like, a specific process. At Valopes, we have taken an industrial ecology overview, which is as a systemic overview, which we don't focus on process, a specific process, but we focus in basically companies or industrial sectors. So from this broader perspective, we can understand which are the inputs that goes to the companies as primary resources and so on. And ahead start understanding which are their outputs. Usually there is one output or two, which is the product the company produces, which is well tracked, but regarding the other outputs as by products or waste, they're not as well tracked. So that's what we're focusing nowadays.
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, you're taking more of a helicopter view. So rather than a single entity, you're looking at a very broad set of organizations and the waste that they're generating.
Exactly.
So if I understand you correctly as well, there are two sets of tools that you're using. The first one, you're mapping processes, and the second one, you're trying to document or you're actually trying to connect buyers of waste. Tell me about the two.
Yeah, well, the first module of our cloud-based platform basically digitalize the information of what's happening inside the companies. Usually, we have found out, at least in LATAM, that this process is a paper-based and Excel process, which requires a lot of manpower. And in that sense, what we do is we replace the paper and the Excel by our platform, and we help to gather, analyze, and consolidate the information so far they have the detailed information to comply with regulation. That's the first module. The second module, which is Deconnect, what it does is that it tries to trace down what is happening with the waste once it goes out from the company. So it's being given to the waste manager or to a recycler, and in that sense, we as well digitalize that information. Nowadays, what happens is that the waste managers or the recyclers, they just provide a paper certificate, which is the one that it's a mandate from the regulators. So in that sense, we digitalize this information as well and tell in real time to the waste generator what is happening with their waste once it's gone away from their company. So it's traceability as well.
Okay, so in addition to clearly mapping processes where waste is being generated, you can track for a manufacturer what's happening to the waste eventually.
Exactly.
Okay, let me ask a question about this. Who buys this kind of service?
Okay, well, right now we're focusing on big companies that have a high level of complexity. So they usually have a environmental engineer who is gathering this data, and their main issue is basically because they require this data to operate, getting licensed to operate. So it's a quite reactive process. And sometimes when they have smaller operations, there is kind of a sketchy development there. So the information, it's not really gathering in real-time data, and they're losing opportunities. So for the time being, we're focusing in this type of clients.
Okay, so as soon as you set up a company, the first thing to appear is a competitor. Who are your competitors?
Well, usually ERPs, control system, management systems, they have a module that it's quite similar to the document, but the things like the price of generating these type of solutions, it's quite high. What we have focused is to develop a well-packaged service that we can just implement in different type of industries. So in that sense, even though there are already solutions in the market, at least for LATAM, Latin America, these solutions are quite expensive. So companies are not buying it, and thus this has given us the opportunity to start entering into a market quite fast.
Okay, so you're entering a market that already exists, but you're coming in with a new perspective on it, targeting the price. So the lower the cost, the more likely somebody is to buy into it.
Yeah.
What is that price?
Well, the implementation fee, it's 5,000 USD. What is the implementation? Basically, what we do, it's kind of a consultancy where we go and track down which is the as-is process of the workflow, how they're lifting up the data and transforming it. And from that point ahead, what we do is we adjust our module and define which are the type of users and the functions each user requires. And of course, if they require extra KPIs like key indicators, we can adjust the dashboard. And then for the Connect, this is quite unique product. So far, we haven't identified a solution that provides this possibility of getting traceability. So in that sense, there is as well a small fee for adjustment, which is lower than the document one. And the starting price for the basic package is 600 USD per month for the Connect and 200 for the document.
Okay, the numbers are not frightening there. What would the rival products cost from a larger ERP, for example?
I don't know, you can be talking about 60 to 80,000 USD implementation fee, plus usually the monthly fee or year license fee that could be around, I don't know, 80,000 or so.
So you're looking at about 1% below that in terms of cost.
Yep.
That does make it attractive. In terms of your company, you've got an unusual mix because you need engineers, you need a developer of some kind, perhaps a database management specialist.
Yep, like that.
How do you pull all that together for that cost?
Well, that's a quite interesting story. Basically, what I have tried, even though I started with the idea and I flew back to Chile, being Colombian, what I tried to identify was people that had the knowledge but had the passion for this topic. So I don't know if it's been luck, but I have been able to have two co-founders, one that is in charge of the technology, that it's like really important for what we're developing, because this is the guy that has allowed us to have really low cost of servers and so on. So he has the one doing all the architecture, that it's like our secret sauce. And then we get my other co-founder that he's a designer, that it's like in charge of the UX UI, which is user experience of the platform. That's one of the key factors that we have been working quite a lot. It's basically to make our solution, our service, as simple as possible so anyone can use it. So in that sense, we have been able to have a mix of a designer, a system engineer, and me, that I'm an industrial engineer, but I have experience working in industrial ecology and industrial symbiosis. So it's a quite interesting team.
What stage of development are you at, and what do you need to move to the next level?
Great. Well, I started this in 2014, back home. It was an idea. From that point ahead, I went to Chile with a dream and money, thanks to the Chilean government that has this program that is called Startup Chile. And there, I had worked before in the mining industry in Chile, so I have good connections. I found my co-founder, who is the designer, and with him we start like creating the first beta. Then we hired the first developers, and one of them is Lucho, who is our CTO. We ran betas during 2016 and pilots, and during this year we start going out to sell the product. So right now we have our first like big clients. Right now we're implementing in Colombia at Coca-Cola, so it's like really exciting because it's a really complex operation that it's allowing us to, in a way, finish to have the market fit of our product in order to continue get more clients in Colombia and in Chile. That's where we're focusing the time being.
Thank you. All those with questions, please take note. We'll take them after we've gone through the session. Unknown to this group, they're pitching to Anne at the end, who will be judging an unofficial competition. Let's keep it moving. We'll now focus on Israel. Israel, your company, HM Energy, is almost the definition of the circular economy. He's able to take tires, and if I understand this correctly, recycle them to produce steel, carbon black, natural gas, and a diesel derivative, or a diesel alternative. Tell us about this.
Yes, we basically realized that in the world, 1.35 billion tires are discarded every single year. So this is a huge waste problem, right? These tires also generate diseases because they generate mosquitoes, which will transmit Zika, dengue, and other viruses. So we realized, how can we actually convert this into something useful? And what we do is, as you mentioned, we convert waste tires into these useful products for the industry. It is not as complex as it seems, I think, because the only thing we're doing is just tearing apart the tire into its most basic components. So a tire is just rubber, which is a hydrocarbon, which is the same as a diesel substitute, steel, and then 30% is carbon black, which is then sold back to the tire companies. And the natural gas is just the tail gas that could not be condensated in the process, and so we put it back, creating a sustainable cycle. That's what we do. Our model is, our plant that you're seeing here is in Monterrey, in northern Mexico, and well, this is our baby, right?
Okay, let me ask a few questions here about this one. So you've got one material coming in, which is purely a waste material. How much do you pay for the tires inbound?
We have a negative cost actually right now.
Can you explain that, please?
Yes, in Mexico, the authorities have done a great job in terms of regulation. So what they say in my state country, Nuevo León, is you have to pay for discarded tires, right? Okay. So you have to pay a price. For us, what we do is we charge a lower price to these people that are discarding tires. So obviously they will come to us. Another of our suppliers, it's just free of cost. We have both of them. I think in the future this will actually shift, and the tires will have cost, right? But it is not important for us in the business model, because at the end of the day, with the research and development we are doing, we're increasing the cost of the price of the materials that we offer to our clients.
Okay, let me just clarify this. So you're being paid to take the tires away from somebody?
Yes.
Because the regulations say they have to pay for the tires?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so there's a negative cost, and I'm still trying to get my head around it. Let's talk about the byproducts here. You've got a tire that's recycled. What comes out of it? How much diesel equivalent can I get out of it? How much steel?
Yeah, it's 42% is hydrocarbon. So not all of the 42% will become diesel. A part of it will become tail gas. 15% will become steel, and 30% will become the carbon black.
What exactly are we looking at on screen in terms of the factory? How does the process work?
So it's basically, it's called the pyrolysis process, which is this is a very known process for many other things like PET, recycling, and many other processes. So basically what we do is we put in a big furnace the chopped tires, then we extract the oxygen from the process, and we elevate temperature with natural gas. Then what happens is that the rubber part of the tire actually converts into gas at 500 degrees Celsius. Then we condensate in the second part of the plant that you see there. And this is the diesel substitute. At the end of the process, when the furnace gets cooled down, you get the steel and the carbon black, and that's about it.
It sounds too good to be true, so let's look at the economics just a little bit here. You've got zero cost on your input. How much is the processing cost, and how much do you sell the outputs for?
When we're working 24 hours, the cost for processing for every liter of substitute diesel is around 6 cents of a dollar, and we can sell for 35 cents of a dollar. So yeah, it's
over 500%.
Yeah, it's a good business, you know. But the thing is, there's two big challenges.
Okay.
One is getting the amount, the volume that you need in order to operate, constantly. And this is, I think, where companies like Octavio's company can help us to map where our raw material is when we scale. We're actually trying to scale this solution 10 times what we already have in northern Mexico. And the second challenge is being an SME working 24 hours is a big challenge. Okay. Because you don't have a lot of resources, you don't have a lot of people, so you have to be there in the plant working and getting dirty for long nights.
Okay, we're recapping again. We've got a free input, 500% margin on the product. The challenge right now is in terms of logistics and bringing the material in, if I understand that. How much does the plant cost?
What you're seeing there, only the equipment is $476,000 plus buying the land and all the civil works and everything else.
And who sells the plant?
We actually designed it, built it, and located it.
I get the sense there'll be a lot of questions when we come through here around your circular economy. I'll come back to you in a moment, but let me move over to Pal Kish, who's a Budapest resident, native. And I think when he explained to me what he does, he kind of likened it to a deep freezer. A deep freezer has a warm rack on the back that's exchanging heat with the inner part, and you've got cold materials on the inside. Now he's able to replicate that process for a building. I'll let you explain it a lot better.
Thank you. First of all, it's very good to be local with you in my town, and thank you for this and sharing your experiences here. And I hope that so far you have good time in Budapest. So our company founded 8 years ago, and the aim was to extract the heat of the wastewater, because we experienced that wastewater as a possible heat source is around us, and we can find it anywhere in cities. And very close to us, in fact, in 300 meters away, there is a site that we recognized as a possible site, and in fact, this is a site that operates for 6 years now. This is a theater and a conference center. There's no other heating and no other cooling, just wastewater. So it's feasible to use the wastewater as heat source, because of the fact that the wastewater as heat source is a steady source. Means that in our case, in Europe, it's roughly 15 degrees Celsius. Means that for heating, we need to heat up much less than the ambient temperature outside when it's cold outside. Or last winter, when we had minus 18 degrees, even here in Budapest was very cold, then the wastewater was still 15 degrees Celsius, so easy to warm up the building with. And when it's warm outside, so we had 38 last summer as highest, then we had to just produce the 6 degrees cold water for the inner system of air handling unit, so makes again a small, we call it delta T, to produce the cold energy. So that's why wastewater is an ideal heat source, both for heating and cooling, not much used so far. And the aim was to generate, to make something that works in big scale, because we recognize very soon that this can work well in big scale when we have massive consumption of energy at the end, and that make it viable as business case. So we concentrated large-scale projects, and so we ended to have the largest references in Europe, here in Budapest especially. And the largest reference we have now is a 4 megawatt hospital. It's a military hospital, 40,000 square meters, 600 bed hospital. So it works really in industrial sizes. So it's a proven technology, and the bad thing is not much used so far. And I think there's a lot of things to do to make it happen.
As I prepared for this, I looked at a number of the concepts and said to myself, one, is this real? Has it already been made? Am I the only person who doesn't know about it? Where else does this take place?
We work in many countries on project preparations. Here in Europe, of course, we work in cooling and heating mode because we have cold winters and warm summers. Especially we have some projects in Southeast Asia, in 3 countries, Malaysia, Thailand and Vietnam, where it's all year-round cooling solution. In fact, this solution is a solution for large cities where we have dense population, because to extract 1 megawatt heat, to give you an idea, 1 megawatt heat is roughly 10,000 square meter building. So let's say a size of building like this. We need 10,000 people as a wastewater to do this because of the extracting heat source. We work with roughly 5 degrees Celsius delta T, so it means that from 15 degrees Celsius we heat up to 20 or cool down to 10. Vice we heat up or cool down the building. So it means that we need large cities. So we focus on projects where we have dense population. And very different business cases are the retrofit projects or new projects, because once you build a new building, then traditionally people buy liquid chillers or cooling towers. or boilers for natural gas, still the case in Europe. Instead, you can buy that sort of equipment, makes just to pay the difference, and makes ROE even 5 years or less. So very viable business case for new buildings.
Okay, so just as a recap here, there's a system called a geothermal pump, where you can drill what's really a small borehole, and you put a series of fluids in a pipe that are able to heat a building above. And you've reversed that process into a patented process that you have that allows you to tap into a sewer line and draw energy from there and heat a building. What's the cost of the input material in the sewer line?
It's always about money at the end. Yes, a very rough estimation for a 1 megawatt project is €1 million here in Europe. It's very much comparable to traditional boilers and liquid chillers price, which would be around 600,000 or 700,000 for traditional methods. It means that once we scale up that sort of equipment, in fact, we just, as I mentioned, realized 4 megawatt project. Recently, we finished a 1.7 megawatt project here in Budapest. Then we have better unit costs. Means that the recent 4 megawatt project was just 2.5 million euro cost. So having big sizes, or even thinking of distance heating based on wastewater, or distance cooling based on wastewater in warm countries, this could be a solution for a lot of end users. Very different end users. Here in this picture over there, this is a building very nearby. It's really near, just next to us, 300 meters away. It's a theater, and the story is very interesting. In fact, that's how it happened. In fact, once they wanted to rebuild this theater, the authority said that you don't have the right to build up a chimney on this because it's an old building. And they sought to build up first geothermal energy and use the park for the drillings. But they ended to recognize that this park next to us, in fact, it's a cemetery from the First World War. It's under the park, in fact. So it was prohibited to do this. And then we came up with the patent already done before, but not the project realized, and it was not a small one. So we made proposal, and we had a very long negotiation with the municipality who owns the building. And we made guarantee for this, and we signed a contract for 15 years to operate it. And now we are, after having 6 years experience here and no other heating, no other cooling in this building, I can say that was a good decision. Not just because we built a project, but because it works well. That's to explain to you that making happen new things is not just because it's good or because it's viable economically, but you need to be lucky because there's no other solution in a building like this. Having such references, we continue to have other end users. And no, we don't promote this anymore in Hungary because architects and investor people, they know us, and they just ask if the wastewater flow is available to build such projects. The conference center, which is willing to be built in Budapest from next year, which is a big one for 5,000 people, is already designed with our heating and cooling system. So to come to this point in this country, in Hungary, we worked a lot to make it happen, and awareness of this solution. But that's still missing in the different countries, because people want to see this reference or such references in their country, and not willing to move to see this here.
Okay, so you retrofit a historical building with your heat exchanger. It costs €1 million a megawatt to construct. Normal payback period is between 5 and 7 years. This one has been working for 6 years without an issue?
This one was 8 years.
8 years. Okay, and the current one, the largest one, is 4 megawatts under development right now. My question is, what's the lifespan of the equipment?
This is a very good question, because as I mentioned, we sign long-term operational contracts, and at least 15 years or longer, and our clients are open to sign this because they just don't care the problem of wastewater and how does it work, but they want to have cheaper energy, in fact. And we worked a lot to have elements that are made to last. All part of screens that we screen first the wastewater and the heat exchanger is made of stainless steel, high-grade stainless steel. And the pipes, any part of the system where we have wastewater, we have stainless steel. We have some pumps, but in a system like this we have just only 6 pumps and 2 heat pumps. The most risky part of that system are very traditional things, the pumps and heat pumps, turning elements. But I would say that as far as the key elements like screens, heat exchangers made to last, the lifespan several decades, let's say 30, 40 years or even longer, like in treatment plants they work for a long time. I would say that maybe in 10 or 20 years we may experience better heat pumps or better pumps. But the fact that we use a heat source that is very good and always better than ambient temperature remains that it's always a high-end solution. So maybe in 10 or 20 years we will change the heat pumps in this building with better heat pumps. But still high-end solution remains.
Okay, my question would be, what are the limitations of the system? What's wrong with it? Why don't we see this in every building? It's green, it's waste to wealth, it's extremely reliable, you can demonstrate the value. What is the limitation?
The limitation is always the location. As I mentioned, we need roughly 10,000 people's flow to produce 1 megawatt energy. So we focus on city centers, and we have some areas that we map as heat source. And there we can build. So we are able to build projects only next to SUVR because the difficult thing about heat, the transport of the heat is expensive. So build pipelines under pavements and longer distances cost a lot of money. So that's why we focus on projects that are situated next to the building. And the difficulty is, again, that users or owners of the buildings are very different. So here is a municipality building. But very often we had hospital people, so very different kind of end user. We have office buildings, other municipality institutions like schools, or we have shopping malls. Very different people. So to promote that sort of technology is very difficult because end users are very, very different kind.
So the limitation is really that each project is bespoke. Who are your competitors?
The investors are very often are the owners of the building because what we can propose for them to save, let's say 30 or 40% of the cost, the energy in a building like this. But no, and that makes this happen even better, that we focus on, and in a panel before there was some talk about this, on business cases, because there are investors search business cases, and entrepreneurs are not always ready to supply them with good business cases. So I think a lot of work has to be done for this to standardize and to make business cases that can be viable for investors.
Thank you. Let me move on to Anne here. Anne, it says that you are the Chief Trade and Investment Support Institutions at ITC. Please explain to me what a TIPO is.
So thank you. Yes, I will explain that, but first of all, let's just reflect that we now know after these couple of days that trade matters. And I think we also now know that trade matters more when it drives inclusive and sustainable economic growth. And you can drive that growth through trade when you have innovation and when you have scale. And we've got 3 great examples here about innovation, and all of them are struggling with scale. So that's where I come in, because ITC believes that you can get scale and trade when you work through institutions who can support businesses to take advantage of the opportunities in global trade. So we have a team at ITC that does just that. We work with what you call TPOs and what we call trade and investment promotion organizations, but not only those sorts of organizations. There are a number of institutions, chambers of commerce, standards organizations, sector organizations, functional women's groups, and they all have a role to play. So what is that role, and how does it help these great examples to gain the scale they need? Well, firstly, it's about making sure that the conditions are in place so that this kind of innovation will thrive, will succeed, will come to the surface. And that means, and we've heard it in a number of panels over the last 2 days, that's about mobility. It's about mobility, movement of people, movement of ideas, movement of capital, and movement of goods and services. And we need that ability to move all those 4 elements for your companies to succeed. And that takes very strong advocacy. And sometimes it's only the institutions that are the credible voice of business that has enough volume and influence in the air of government to change those fundamental conditions. So that's number one. The second thing, though, is that they can do that through not only doing it themselves, but creating this ecosystem. We've heard that again, this term ecosystem has been heard over and over again in the last few days. And that means that institutions can be at the center of a whole series of other support institutions. And they have a role to play to make sure that those connections are very strong. And also potentially to hand over power to some other institution to do the work for them, which is a hard thing to do. The next part of the puzzle is how do institutions work with individual companies like yours to make sure that you have access to the resources you need, information about markets, access to capital. We had some really interesting comments in the previous panel about making sure that innovative businesses are investment ready. So there's some training, some skills that are required. How do you find the potential new customers for your product? How do you find the logistic solutions you need? So all those are things that institutions should be preparing themselves to help you with. And then the third thing about institutions that's really important is how do we make sure that the pioneers that we see on the stage become the catalyst for further growth? How can these examples of innovation that are turning waste to wealth be inspirational for other businesses? How can we make sure that these organizations, these companies create a cluster of other companies that grow from your success? How can we make sure that you are building not only the brand of your own company, but also the brand of a sector and also the brand of a country, so that becomes a competitive advantage for all those who follow? So that's why institutions are there as part of the landscape in which we hope that more and more organizations like yours can succeed.
So all three of these are deeply interconnected. For example, Octavio could be mapping a process and identify that there's a heat exchange opportunity for PAL. You could also identify a point where tires are available. PAL could then supply a heat exchanger to Israel's company. And one of the mandates of the ITC is to try and take innovations like these and roll them out in developing countries. So to each of the three entrepreneurs, I'll first ask them, is your concept or your company viable in a developing country? And then, Anne, I'd like to ask you how you'd go about rolling that out.
Well, that's a great question regarding Valopes. Well, we come from developing countries as Colombia and Chile, or emerging ones. For us, business as usual regarding waste. Companies trace this waste because they need this info to have a license to operate. So basically, this implies that there is a regulatory framework and control. But as well, there is a new paradigm, and it's regarding waste to wealth. So it's as well showing to governments and to companies that it's not only because you need to have this data just to send it to these environmental bodies in each country or region, but as well there is a business opportunity to transform this waste into new resources and start getting some income some flows that you were actually before giving money someone just to send it to landfills. So I think it's as well showing them that there is a business opportunity behind. And that's what we're trying to achieve, actually. Sometimes when we go to a company, we tell them, okay, we're going to help you be more agile and have control over your information in a fast, easy way, and cost-benefit way as well. But besides that, we are trying and working along in order to, in the near future, help you connect with new opportunities in the ecosystem that allows you to divert waste from landfills or final disposition.
Thank you. Israel.
Yes. No, I'm kidding. No, yes, of course. I mean, you know what? Part of the innovation we're doing is creating the module that is completely scalable. So we could go to Chile, we could go to Colombia with Octavio, we could go to Brazil, to many countries. Obviously, we need to look at a couple things. One is finding the right partner. So this is obviously something that is very important because the success of that joint venture will be dependent on the right partner for us. And the second one is the regulatory framework, right? So we need to find places that is easy to make business or not very hard to make business, that is a good regulatory framework. And as we are dealing with hydrocarbons in certain countries, the hydrocarbons are regulated in a very strict manner, and it's complicated to do business. Obviously, we need to find the places that are densely populated by vehicles so that they generate enough raw materials for us to produce.
Paul?
In my business, means heating and cooling, integration technology is a very good idea, in fact. Here, for example, the project I mentioned, we sought to integrate this project with solar, and we still work on this idea because once we are able to develop this well, we can become completely independent from the grid and for cooling solution. And developing countries are very often warm countries, and to make accessible air condition, I think this still something that not happened yet, or something that even in hospitals they don't have very often air condition. For this and to solve that sort of challenges, I think we need to hard to develop further technologies, to integrate technologies like solar with heating and cooling in this case, and we work also on downscaling technology. It means that once we have something that works in a certain scale and viable in a certain scale, in our case it's 1 megawatt and above, then we may think that it should work in smaller scale also for residential. And very often people ask the question that why we don't have residential building houses with our technology. The reason is simple, because even for a residential building we need to have a shaft with screen and heat exchanger. All the equipment in small scale makes it very expensive for one unit. But once we can do this in a compact size, in an integrated model, and the factory makes it in big scale, I mean in a lot of quantity sold, then it's different thing. So I think technologies have two ways. It may be to develop further as integration with other things and to be part of a bigger system. Another thing is that if we can make it accessible for big masses, then it's better for the business and better for the end users, and of course, and probably the most important, it's good for the climate, because in our case we save on CO2 emission. Instead, we use much less electricity for cooling with sewer lines.
Thank you. Anne, I would ask you the question. We have 3 innovators here. Part of your mandate is to help scale up projects like this and take them to developing countries. How do you do that?
Yes, so I talked about institutions. So the role that my team plays in ITC is to strengthen institutions so that they can help that to happen. Right? So it's not me, it's the way in which we strengthen the institutional framework. So how might this happen? First of all, moving into another country has got to be good for your business, right? So that means it's got to be desirable in that market, it's got to be feasible in that market, and you talked about access to raw materials, and it's got to be viable in that market in terms of the profitability. But it's always going to be a question of finding good partners, and for those partners it's always going to have to be good business for them too. And so that means you'll need information. You'll need information about local conditions. You'll need access to information about regulations. You'll need access to partners who have got some kind of credibility and power. And you'll need access to the network of all the support that you can get. But this is about making good business. But what you also bring is the ability to make business good. And that's where it gets exciting, because you bring in an additional benefit to some kind of local opportunity. So what does that mean? It means that you can offer partners in regional value chains an added social license to operate. You talked about regulatory licenses to operate, but we now know that what's just as important is the social license to operate. Regional value chains are incredibly important in the way they create economic value. And if your organizations, your companies can become part of those regional value chains, then you have a big impact to play. So what does that mean? It means that you have to be very sure of the environmental value that you bring, and to be able to tell a very compelling story about the value that your product brings to that regional value chain. You also have to have a very compelling story about your own company, that if you are offering green solutions, you have to be green yourself. So that might mean there's actually some local companies in the countries you're moving into that can help you to be even greener. So think about ways in which you can actually create new models of working in your new countries as well that are sustainable and innovative. The other story you need to be able to tell is the story of your industry. How are you turning tires into steel? How are you turning wastewater into heat? And you probably have to tell a sustainable story about your country and where you come from. And these sustainable stories are difficult to manage. And again, a good institution will help you to do this, both the one in your own country and the one in the country you might be moving into. Because you've got to be very careful not to fall into greenwashing. So how do you tell a story about that extracts value from people's perception of your green credentials without taking any risks that you are overselling that? So if you move into a position where you are extracting reputational value from your sustainable credentials that you are not actually delivering on, that's good value, but it's high risk. And you can only do that if at the same time you tell a very compelling story of how you are helping your business and other businesses to meet that performance that's expected of you. So what can ITC do? We work on projects. We love what organizations like you, your companies like you do. My section works with institutions. We believe that in strengthening institutions we can help you to succeed, and that means information, it means networks, it means partnerships, and it means some great stories that build that good business, and business is good.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. At this stage I'd like to turn over to the crowd and offer anyone who'd like to ask any questions. Are there any questions in the room? Show of hands. Please, if you could have a microphone. If you could please give your name. Thank you very much. The microphone is on the way. Do we have a second set of questions after that?
My name is Yvette Stevens. I'm the ambassador of Sierra Leone in Geneva. When I was very much attracted to the subject, which is waste to wealth. The examples we have had, I mean, while maybe commendable, but really I was hoping there would be something that would be ready for me to take back to my country. When you mentioned the tires, I said, good, we have tons of tires, But for us, recycling means cutting the tires and making shoes with them. That's one way. But then the question I wanted to ask, these processes which you described, first of all, they're expensive. So basically for countries which can support and subsidize, that is a reality. But for some of our countries, you can forget it. The government is not going to subsidize you because you have a green technology to recycle. You have to make sure that that becomes profitable in itself. So that is one problem that I think we would have to look at. The second question which I have, which is a quick one, is that some of these processes do give rise also to emissions. You know, how do you safeguard that some of the emissions which come out from these processes are not toxic? And how do you then safeguard the population from such toxic?
Thank you very much. So we'll start with the first question. If I understand you correctly, there are actually three questions. One is about the cost of the processes and whether or not they're ready to deploy in your country immediately. The second one is around the emissions that are being created. I understand you correctly there. So let me start with Octavio here. The process you described is $5,000 for setup and $200 a month thereafter. Can that work in Sierra Leone?
Well, yes, sure, it could work basically because for the time being, we're focusing on big companies. So more than being a cost, like for example, usually nowadays, big corporations, they use softwares to just trace down what is happening in their process. And as I told you before, the prices for those softwares are maybe 60 times mine or so. So in that sense, for a company, it's a really interesting price. That's the status where we are at. Of course, we hope in the near future to have the capacity to introduce our platform to other type of companies, medium size or even small size. But for that, we need and we are focused, or we should develop another strategy which have like lower prices and could be competitive for them. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll then turn to Israel here and say that when we spoke to you earlier, you mentioned that the process itself has got a 500% return and the tires are going to waste in Sierra Leone. Is it viable there?
Of course, and I don't think we need grants at all. This is a viable business. So what we need is, as Anne were mentioned, and also in the last panel, investor readiness. So we only need to be ready for investors to come, and then we can deploy our solution. So we're not asking for charity from the government, and I think this is a very important issue for green businesses, right? That some green businesses want to to expand because they're green, not because they're a business. And for us, it is a business and it is green. The other thing in your second question, if I may, we obviously generate emissions. Everyone generates emissions, and if we map all the emissions everyone generates, we would get crazy, right? But if you compare the emissions we generate for our three products, for example, carbon black generates 98% less carbon emissions than the competitor. Steel generates 98% less carbon emissions, and diesel substitute 25% less carbon emissions. So we do generate carbon emissions, but it's green because we generate a lot less than our competitors, and with every module we would be saving 6 times the volume of the trees contained in Central Park of New York. So that's a practical question.
Handing over to Paul, my question would be this. Earlier on in the process, we discussed the fact that your system can be used for heating a building, which is quite practical in Europe. Can it be used for cooling a building, which is a huge cost in Africa?
Yes, of course. In Southeast Asia, all of our projects are just cooling projects and viable projects. So, in fact, we compete always with traditional technologies. In case of cooling, we compete with traditional liquid chillers. They consume more electricity than our solution, and very often in warm countries, the technology is used is cooling tower. Cooling tower evaporates the water to have better efficiency in cooling. It means that if we install our system, which is a closed system, we save clean water. In fact, we save roughly in a bigger building 5 or 10 cubic meter per hour water that goes to air. But the problem, in fact, is very often that artificially the price of electricity and water is something that is decided by the government and not the real cost. So even if let's say Middle East, we have project preparation where we can save water, which is produced from the sea and with very expensive technologies. But at the end, they sell it very cheap. So if I make a saving on that, they say the business case is not good enough. But in real term, I save water that costs much more than this, but it's not counted. So that's why we need very often to go through this question with governments, with decision makers, if it has a real added value in countries where the electricity is artificially low for end users or the water is very cheap for end users, because globally speaking, saving is needed on national level.
What are the emissions in your business? From your business?
We reduce CO2 emission, so it's very easy. In fact, once I save 30 to 40% on electricity, I save 30 to 40% CO2 emission. And if I save on clean water, there's a footprint, CO2 footprint of water depending on the technology. There we save also.
Thank you for that. Do we have any more questions? Any hands up? Without any more questions, let's move to have closing remarks from each of you, minute or under, if you can.
Well, I think the waste to wealth, or as other people calls it, trash to cash, it's a huge opportunity. But the thing is, it requires to improve the data, and that's why from Balopes we are focusing on harnessing this data in order to, in the midterm, start connecting these waste generators with opportunities of companies as Paul and as Israel that have innovative solutions that can take waste and recover value from it by introducing a new product or a product to the economy. So I think that's really important. I believe that it's not only greener, because usually these products, when they're not using raw material, but they're using waste, they have a net saving, not only regarding CO2, but as well regarding ecological footprint, or as well regarding water footprint. So in that sense, the impact or the sustainability impact is quite huge. And regarding the social aspect, this is a new industry. This is an industry that it's just starting all around the world. So this implies that it's going to generate new work. So in that sense, well, these type of plants will help to create jobs and in that sense as well generate wealth. So I think that's quite important, and I believe that's it. And the message that I want to give you. So remember, waste equals resources, and resources well transformed equals wealth.
Thank you. For us, our vision is that waste will become the raw material of the future. And I think that future, it's getting closer and closer every day. We're seeing that in many other different types of waste that are actually getting value to buy. You have to buy them. So in order to create wealth from waste, what we need to do is to work on research and development. That's what we are focusing a lot on. And don't imagine that research and development means millions and millions of dollars of investment. We have a small lab in Monterrey, with 3 people working full time, and we've done all what we've done with only these 3 people. Remarkable people, obviously, but sometimes I think innovation doesn't feel like a big milestone one day. It feels like, okay, we improved this one day, and then the next week we improved a little bit more. And you keep on improving and improving, And at the end of 1 year or 2 years, you have a very huge breakthrough that's actually something that is very interesting for a lot of people. So for us, is keep on doing research and development, the most important thing to convert waste into wealth.
In energy mix of a country, heating and cooling has very often a major part. And heating and cooling could be sustainable, and should be sustainable, in fact, because of the challenges coming from the climate change. And if you just extract from this panel that there are solutions already available for this, and you maybe remember that there is a solution to use, for example, wastewater, something that we made already a step forward, and made the awareness of people that we can do something for the future.
Thank you. And we'll draw on your experience as a trade specialist. All of these ideas appear to be viable on the face of it, but I'll ask you this question. Which of these do you see being the first to go international, and why?
I don't think I can answer that question, but if you wanted me to pick a winner, knowing if I think about these three companies and what they're achieving, I think the winner in this game is us, everybody. And I think that's really important. But I think there's another thing which for me would be the sign of a winner. And that's that when we have a similar conversation in maybe 5 years' time, none of these companies are on the stage. And it's not because they've failed, it's because they have become normal and no longer an innovation to be talked about and admired. So I really hope for all of you a great deal of anonymity, because what you've achieved has become normal. Congratulations.
Thank you. For all those watching online and the group that are here today, we'd like to thank the ITC and the Hungarian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade and the fantastic panel in front of you, 3 innovators and 1 trade specialist. Can we have a round of applause to close this? Thank you very much.
We would like to thank the panelists of this last session, and also all of the speakers of the last 2 days for the really thought-provoking and stimulating discussions. Thank you very much. And of course, everyone who participated.